Hello and welcome to our conversations. Now, as you're aware, the 44th Heads of Summit conference will be held here in Hawaii under Sadc. Of course, that will be in August. So we decided at ZTM Prime, under our conversations, to speak to all 16 ambassadors or representatives from the Sadc nations in Zimbabwe. We wanted to know, what do they think should happen at the Sadc conference? What do they think the leaders can possibly be talking about? How can we promote and stimulate regional integration and regional cooperation among Sadc members? How can we do everything that we can for the betterment of Sadc citizens? I'm now joined here on our conversations by Zemha Gawachas. Yes, I hope I said that right. Namibian Chargé d'Affaires at the, obviously here at the Namibian Embassy in Zimbabwe. Zemha, thank you so much for talking to ZTM Prime. Most appreciate it. How do you say hello in Namibian?
Well, from my vernacular, you say Klinkwas. Klinkwas Matisa.
Oh, very nice. What a beautiful language.
Yes, I'm very excited to be part of this conversation, and thank you for having the embassy.
It's only a pleasure. Right, now, look, you know, Namibia and Zimbabwe, I mean, we go back so far. We're here talking about the liberation struggle. We're here talking about your support, of course, and also, again, your support with us against apartheid in South Africa, which was a major issue at the time. Maybe you could just give us an overview, your assessment of the bilateral relations that exist at the moment between Zimbabwe and Namibia.
Thank you, Andy. I have to start with acknowledging the unwavering support of the people and the government of the Republic of Zimbabwe during the passing of His Excellency, the late Dr. Hakainde Geingob. His Excellency, Dr. Mnangagwa, really took time to comfort our nation as well as bid farewell to his brother. And I would have failed if I did not thank the Museum of African Liberation for co-hosting a beautiful memorial service worthy of the life and legacy of the late Dr. Hakainde Geingob. I think these actions speak for themselves and are testament of the enduring friendship and solidarity between our two people. So as you have rightly said, Andy, the relationship between Namibia and Zimbabwe is consolidated by not only a common hope for the African Renaissance and the prosperity of our two people, but there's tangible social cohesion, which I believe is deeply rooted in our shared history and our liberation stories. And so where the rubber meets the road, I think over the past couple of years, we have really elevated our diplomatic relations, particularly with the signature of the Binational Commission, to reach beyond mere politics and address and strengthen socioeconomic growth. I mean, this is quite evident in the upward scale of our trade partnership with a compound annual growth rate of about 47.6%.
I know, that's huge, isn't it? I mean, compared to the region, I mean, we're down at 2% this year, I mean, into year-on-year GDP growth. But, I mean, looking at that relationship, though, of course, you know, as I said, and thank you for that, it was remiss of me not to obviously pass condolences to yourself and the Namibian people on behalf of ZTM Prime at the loss of your late leader. That was unexpected and sad, unfortunately.
Yes.
But now, I know that Namibia and Zimbabwe have been trying over the years to foster and grow the relationship, particularly, as you said, outside of the political sphere, talking economics. Because at the end of the day, that is really what's going to uplift our citizens throughout the whole of Sadc. Talk to me about the areas that we're exploring in terms of bilateral trade, bilateral integration, bilateral cooperation. What is on the cards, or what are we working at?
Yeah, so Andy, the symbiosis between our two countries is informed by the principles of mutual trust, mutual respect, and mutual benefit. And this has really paved way for a substantial number of MOUs and agreements that speak to this intent of increasing our trade cooperation, our economic cooperation. And the low-hanging fruit, I believe, are ripe for the picking. We have as you know, the Walfish Bay dry port. Zimbabwe has a dry port in Walfish Bay, and this has opened up the Golden Gateway for Zimbabwe to the west coast of Africa and also to major economies in the world. We have had accelerated negotiations trilaterally, of course, alongside the Republic of Botswana for the Trans-Kalahari Highway. And so we have numerous agreements in place. We have increased our B2B contact through the MOU on small and medium enterprises, and we have a twinning agreement between our regions and provinces, particularly the Kavango East region and Mashonaland West, which has increased not only employment but also food security. We've had successful Maidsi trials at Ukavango, and
this is twinning with Harare, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? Windhoek and Harare have some agreement?
The twinning agreement between Windhoek and Harare unfortunately lapsed a few years ago.
Oh, shame, because I actually met your mayor of Windhoek. He came up recently. Moses, very nice chap, very committed to Windhoek and the career. In fact, a nice shout out to him. He's a really great guy and his team there.
Yeah, so we're revitalizing the twinning agreement between Windhoek and Harare.
Now, one thing I've noticed is that there are a lot of MOUs signed between Zimbabwe and all sorts of SADC countries, but I always talk about implementation, and that it's no good having an MOU if you're not going to use it. So, is one of the tasks of your embassy to at least try and at least operationalize some of these things, particularly bringing in the private sector, because government is there to facilitate, the private sector is there to do business, and we talked about low-hanging fruit. What do you think would be the low-hanging fruits? I mean, we talked earlier about cattle, for example. I mean, you've got fantastic beef and, of course, the trade route going through. But what are you seeing?
Right. So there's a number of initiatives. As you said, the beef is one of them. Namibia is a world-class exporter of best-in-class beef to China, the Eurozone, and also much of Africa. So we've been talking about beef export. There's a great market gap for beef export, and Namibia is also an emerging exporter of small livestock meat, cold meats, dates, blueberries. So there's really room to explore these avenues. Andy, I must say that we recently participated in the ZITF as an exhibitor, and simultaneously the Walfish Bay Corridor Group alongside Namport and Buck Logistics Zimbabwe conducted business-to-business meetings, which were of great success. We have managed to explore new areas besides the traditional agricultural or fish, mineral export. And so we are expanding towards food and beverage manufacturing as well as agro-packaging solutions. So that is one of the low-hanging fruits that are really coming into play.
I mean, I looked at the numbers. 2023, Namibia exports to Zimbabwe were worth 44.35 million US. The main products included vehicles other than railway, electronic equipment, fish, crustaceans, mollusks, aquatic invertebrates. But I think people ignore the fact that by you having that port, okay, in a way that is trade. It may not be between Zimbabwe and you and Namibia, but we need that corridor, we need your port, and in a way that does contribute to the economic growth, as you said, into that west coast and getting up that way, rather than going through Maputo, Beira, or through Durban. So that's very important. But
yes, and of course the Walfish Bay Corridor is just not an alternative. I mean, we have record speed in terms of delivery and reducing the time between port and store. We have uncongested traffic, and so it's no longer an alternative, but it is the way to go.
It's the way to go,
especially for Zimbabwe and considering our dynamic economic.
I mean, you think about it, you got the East Corridor, Namibia, you got the other side to Mozambique, north up to Tanzania, and south down to South Africa. It just makes sense for all of us to go through, doesn't it?
It makes perfect sense.
But I will say, though, that one thing I was surprised at when I looked at some of the numbers of trade between Zimbabwe and other SADC countries, in fact, our trade has increased with Namibia. I mean, it was 3.93 million in 2017, 28.1 in 2022, and 44 in 2023. So at least you can see that something is happening. Is this being driven by, as you said, B2B? This is what's happening, really. It's about business getting involved now to drive business.
Yes, and I think what we are witnessing is not only a deepening of our diplomatic ties, but really a paradigm shift, more in alignment with both the Harambee Prosperity Plan 2 and the Zimbabwean NDS1, which is geared towards economic prosperity. So what our two governments are doing is really look at the socioeconomic development dynamics of our relations and foster
I will talk about that later, but it just makes sense if economic plans across SADC sort of talk to each other, because then otherwise if they didn't, it would be harder to. We'll talk about that later when we talk about the SADC conference coming up. Low-hanging fruit from Zimbabwe to you. I mean, we exported only 10.4 million, so we're importing more than we're exporting, and that's mainly, listen to this, mainly electricity, 24.9 million, packaged medicaments, 900,000, iron structures, and so. So, what do you think Zimbabwe can improve in terms of trade, in terms of products that it can send to Namibia?
I think we've done very well in terms of our people-to-people contact. Zimbabwe has given Namibia the benefit of highly skilled individuals in their various areas of expertise. So we have benefited from the knowledge of the dynamic workforce of this country. There is room, especially with this energy transition happening, for us to collaborate in terms of green hydrogen, green ammonia fertilizers, and unfortunately, because of the climate in Namibia, we are a semi-arid country nestled between two grand deserts, and so we have minimal rainfall, and what the government is currently working on is irrigation and green schemes. So we could really use Zimbabwean expertise in terms of agricultural technologies, and there's room for IPPs. We know that the region is having an electrical deficit, and so what Namibia operates in is sufficient for IPPs. Those are independent power producers. Yes, to work in partnership with NAM Power and use these renewable energies to have.
Well, that's interesting, because one thing I noticed that we're not exporting agricultural produce to you. It doesn't seem like it's not in the big amounts as I would expect.
Well, there's room for improvement, but I mean, we are importing vegetables and fruit. I've told you about the food and manufacturing avenue that we're looking into. So we are doing that. We depend on Zimbabwe's arable land for some of our food, and I mean, Zimbabwe is one of the only two African countries that have attained wheat sufficiency. So there are talks to look to the Zimbabwean market for wheat imports to really reduce our overdependence on the South African market and distant markets.
It's always good to diversify. Yeah, otherwise you get stuck. Yeah.
Yes, we are.
Now I want to talk about some issues. The last one, I must be honest, it's one area where I'm not sure Zimbabwe and Namibia are friends, and that's football, because you keep beating us. So I'm not going to talk about that. As much as you're our brothers and sisters, unfortunately in football I have a different opinion. But let's talk about educational exchanges. There's joint research projects happen. Sports, of course, we meet in our sports across all volleyball, netball. I know we played netball recently in South Africa. Obviously, we played in the COSAFA Cup and so forth. I mean, that people underestimate how important it is for people to know people. Because I think it's that networking and that ability to know each other, know each other's countries, know each other's how we think, how we operate, how what our cultures are, that actually does play a part in integration and regional, all the stuff we talk about as SADC. What are your view on that?
No, you're very right to say that. I think people-to-people contact is not only important, it is critical. I think it reduces the fear that we have of each other, and it fosters trust. You do not know a people until you've immersed yourself in their culture. And so it is important for these people-to-people exchanges and cultural exchanges to introduce each other to what makes a Zimbabwean Zimbabwean, and what makes a Namibian Namibian. And those divisions can maybe become blurry over time, you know, as we figure out that we are just one people. You speak about education, and education is good, but I don't think education is enough. Education needs to be supported by an array of other initiatives. You know, the question is, are we truly educated if we cannot think for ourselves?
I think the argument came in that we shouldn't be teaching our youth to be educated for jobs. We should be teaching them to be entrepreneurs and trying to create value. But instead of that I can go the old British system where you go in and you sort of get a job after you finish university. And I think you're right what you say.
And that comes into play with the ability to think and to create from the knowledge that you know.
Exactly.
Right.
100%.
And in terms of, because I'm a woman, I would like to speak on the subject matter of being a woman.
Please, I think gender is important. In fact, we're behind in gender.
In Africa, it reminds me of this quote of a British writer and political activist, George Monbiot. And he has this beautiful quote that says that if hard work was the inevitable result, if wealth was the inevitable result of hard work, then every woman in Africa would be a millionaire.
I cannot agree more. You're so right.
And we have not seen that. We have not seen that because education is not enough. We have a strong workforce. Women in Africa make about 1/3 of the workforce. Yet there is room for increasing access to opportunity. I think a productive land.
I did say once that once we looked at the statistics, there were more women than men in Zimbabwe. I said the women are running out of men in Zimbabwe. but what I think is right. I mean, but I think what people forget is that through that unpaid labor, which is women going to get water, getting they spend hours every day cleaning and so forth, it's unpaid. It actually supports a lot of governments where they would be paying social security. So you're 100% right. Talking about that before I move on, I mean, how are you with the gender side? Because I know we've got a lot more to do here, particularly on equal pay, equal opportunities. Is it a similar kind of situation? I know your government has been very, very, one of their priorities is gender balance.
Yes, we actually have a first female presidential candidate for these upcoming elections in November. I think that speaks to our political maturity and the strength of our zebra-styled gender parity policy. Namibia is currently ranked amongst the top 10 with the most egalitarian countries, alongside the likes of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and so gender representation, equality of opportunity and education, those policies are strongly supported.
Also, girl child, boy child, also those sort of things, people living with people with disabilities and so forth. These are critical.
These are critical. I think it boils down to our inclusion sort of mindset that no one should be left behind. And I think when we look at the gender issues, for a long time we also left the boy child out, which we shouldn't, because an empowered woman needs an empowered man.
Wow, this is great. I think on that fantastic note, let's take a quick breather. You're watching Our Conversations. I'm here with Zemha Gawachas, Namibian Chargé d'Affaires here based in Harare, of course, representing the ambassador of Namibia. But Our Conversations will continue. After the breather, we'll talk about SADC now and what Namibia may expect the discussions to be held in SADC. And also, how bad is the drought affecting Namibian people? Don't go away. Our Conversations will be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Our Conversations. I'm Andy Hodges, and this is ATM Prime. Now, to recap, of course, the 44th Annual Heads of State Summit for SADC will be held in Harare in August. And, of course, before that, there will be what we call the SADC Industrialization Week. In fact, all roads in SADC will lead to Zimbabwe, Harare in August. And ZTM Prime has decided to interview all the 16 SADC embassies, SADC ambassadors, their representatives, just to get an idea from them what we can expect, what conversations will be held in August. And I'm sitting now with Zemha Gawachas, Namibian Chargé d'Affaires. She's going to get me later for not pronouncing it properly, but I'm not doing too badly, am I? Zemha, thank you so much again for talking to ZTM Prime. Now, let's talk about this El Nino, because this drought is a big problem. I mean, I know that the SADC countries have got together to try and have one appeal for the 55 million people that could be suffering from it. Just first of all, explain what is happening in Namibia concerning the drought, because of course one of the major impacts of drought is cattle. They die in numbers. What's happening in Namibia because of El Nino?
Yeah, well, Andy, the issue of climate action is no longer a Goldilocks concept. It requires active participation from all of us, really. And Namibia has been severely affected by the El Nino drought, and based on the appeal on the 20th May, my government has declared a state of emergency. It is quite devastating, solely because 70% of the Namibian population depends on the land, directly or indirectly. So we have had reports that most of the countries affected, from the Karas to the Omasati region.
Okay, I can appreciate crops. Is it also not livestock? What actually is being...
Mainly, when we look at the link with food security, it has to be crops. We've had low crop yields and low cereal production, with about a 9% decline. That, if translated, would mean about 695 Namibians are facing acute food insecurity.
Wow. That's almost 3/4 of the population.
Well, we're a very small population, so it'll be about 24% of the population.
Wow.
I have to give credence to my government for really engaging a whole of government approach and trying to meet the needs. I've heard that we need about over 400,000 Namibian dollars to bridge the funding gap. However, the government has several drought relief programs looking at livestock assistance, seed and horticulture assistance, as well as water provision. So the situation, to say the least, is quite critical.
But no one will suffer. I mean, they'll be looked after, at least the more vulnerable in the communities. I mean, I know our government has done the same. I'm sure your government has also.
There will be need, according to the reports from HQ, there will be need for humanitarian assistance by 2025, should the drought persist.
Then again, it's back to what you said earlier about drought-proofing, irrigation, ensuring that we're not under vagrancies of weather. We can't depend on, unfortunately, I know we love God, but we can't depend on Him all the time to help us. Yeah. Right, Zemha, let's talk about SADC now. The SADC summit is coming up. Now, if I had to put you on the spot, kind of, I know you can't speak on behalf of your president, well, you can in a way, but not what he's thinking, but what do you think? The SADC leaders who gather in Harare in August, what do you believe from Namibia's perspective should be the top, let's say five agenda items that you really wish as Namibia that they looked at and at least came up with some roadmap going forward?
Right. There's a lot of issues. I think we need to give credit where credit is due. SADC has made an incredible contribution as a bloc to the political security in the region. I'm aware that Samim just left Mozambique yesterday, and that was a great success. We've seen a decline in malaria in Botswana, Eswatini, Namibia as well through SADC efforts, and there's been an increase in ICT connection between our countries because of the active work of our member states and of course through their relentless funding. But there are areas that need improvement. We need greater resources being pooled to infrastructure development, our railways, our roads, and just increasing that value chain. And there's also need for gender-based violence. We need gender mainstreaming and just awareness on the subject of gender-based violence. We are actually facing terrible numbers in terms of women that are being abused at that level.
It'd be nice to put that on the agenda, I think. I think it really will show the importance of it.
Yes, of course, it has to be on the agenda. And
Power.
Power.
I mean, power to me is probably, it's right up there, isn't it?
I think we are doing well. The IPPs are working hard alongside the Southern African Energy Pool to really help us pool our resources, our expertise, and our strategies to help the region in terms of the electricity deficit. Water management, there's another...
That's a big issue as well.
We really have to implement our resource development and management in terms of water for water security and eco-stability in the region.
What do you feel about what I may call regional integration? Here I'm talking about whether I'm talking about regional value chains, whether I'm talking about regional integrating some of our more common or more common issues between us. I mean, I think when I don't feel looking at what we've achieved as SADC, we have gone far enough to regionally integrate in our particularly value chains, because with African Continental Free Trade Area, we got to get away from this conception of competing to working together to achieve success.
Yes.
What are your feelings?
No, I agree with you. I think collaboration is the vertical link to political stability and economics stability, as well as security in the region. We have to make greater efforts to decrease our trade barriers and remove trade barriers and ensure that there is free movement of goods, that the regional integration priority indicators have been met as part of the SADC Vision 2050, and that would require a greater political will. You know, people are tired of us hosting talking shops. They want...
It's action time.
they want action. And we are on the right way.
You just mentioned trade there, of course, looking on trade barriers. Now, one issue that I would hope, and I really do hope that the SADC leaders talk to, is the introduction of an African payment system. I think Africa is too dependent on international payment systems, particularly with US dollars, and also all the charges that come with that payment system. We also don't settle in our own currencies, which doesn't make any sense. If I export to Namibia, you export, we should settle in Namibian dollars and the ZiG. What do you think your government's thoughts on that, about trying to make Africa be like what we should be, which is one continent standing up on its own, rather than us being one continent where half of us is dependent on someone else? Or what are your views around those issues?
Well, that would require a harmonization of our policies, our national agendas, informed, of course, by the greater SADC vision or the African vision as a whole. Namibia has a highly sophisticated payment system, and we have really done well in terms of the ease of currency convertibility, which is aided by our Investment Act. So all of these measures have to be put in place for us to be able to compete at a global level. That is requiring us to have an easy business environment, you know, not only within ourselves, but amongst each other.
I mean, I noticed, when I look at some of the countries, everyone points to Rwanda. Rwanda's down to 6 hours. Us guys, we may be down to 2 weeks in terms of ease of doing business and how to do business and attract people. But that's interesting. Now, one of the major themes, of course, of the SADC conference will be industrialization. Where does Namibia stand on industrialization? What do you think needs to be discussed at the summit about industrialization? Because it ties into trade, of course.
Well, industrialization is a big theme, it's a critical theme, and it requires candid conversation on our policies, our mechanisms that are in place, and the measures that we're willing to employ. And Namibia has done great. We have the Vision 2030, which is informing our strides towards industrialization. And one of the key critical areas that we're looking at is the energy transition, moving to net zero and having a green economy. So of course, the SADC leaders have to come together and talk about infrastructure, also upscaling the skill set of our people, yes, and enhancing economic cooperation, of course, as I mentioned, through the removal of trade barriers, adding value to our production, our mineral beneficiation is a big issue for us to really inherit the full value of our commodities.
Because this business of exporting raw materials has got to stop. I mean, we need to be at least doing some value addition. I mean, I can appreciate we can't do the full thing, but possibly in some areas we should be.
Yeah.
But this concept of shipping out raw materials has got to be over.
Right, and it's also about. I find it quite funny that we will have to export our materials and buy them back, and it's such an alarming rate and high
I must be honest, it does irritate me. Particularly pots and pans. You know, we import the iron ore, buy the pots and pans more expensively. But what I find, and again, I liked what you said earlier about this not being a talk shop, because we did start talking industrialization as far back as 2013, 2014. But to be frank, it looks like we've really taken very tiny, I wouldn't even call them baby steps to get that. So, I mean, what do you think then needs to be done? Again, we don't want to come and have another summit where we talk industrialization. Do you believe that the leaders and of course all the ministers of the various states must come up with concrete plans and concrete lines in the sand to draw so we know that we can monitor that we're meeting these goals? I mean, how do you implement such policies at such a high level is the hard part, I suppose.
Well, you know, they say that Africa has the best white papers and policies in the world.
We do. I love them.
You know, they're beautifully written, but I believe that humans are the custodians of implementation. So we need people that are empowered to drive this implementation. We need people that have the knowledge, the will, the courage to drive the implementation. So it's not enough to just speak at that platform. We really have to trickle these decisions down and have them meet the ground at a grassroots level so that everybody's geared up towards the agenda for industrialization.
If I had to look at Namibia, if I sat there with all 16 countries and I said, right, industrialization, Namibia, what do you want? What would you like industrialized in your country? What are you looking at? Are you looking at trying to diversifying your economy, moving into light manufacturing? Are you looking at agri? What exactly is Namibia's strategy going forward? Because at some point, I'm sure your mineral resources may run out and your economy must change. I mean, what is the thinking of the government?
Yeah. So I think the thinking of the government is to foster economic resilience, and we've done this through setting up, I'm not sure if you heard about the Welvicha Fund, which is Namibia's sovereign wealth fund, and it is centered around economic resilience, national resilience, and also intergenerational prosperity, transferring wealth. That would mean that we have a renewable and sustainable approach to the way we use our mineral resources to ensure that the future generation can reap the fruits of what we have as a country. Namibia also has one of the best financial markets in the world, according to the ABSA group, and so we have put structures in place. Currently, we are also reviewing the Investment Act so that it can be amended to address the breaches in the business climate. And learning from Zimbabwe, I'm happy to say this, the High Court of Namibia is setting up a commercial court division.
Isn't one of our judges one of your High Court or justices, if I'm not mistaken? I remember I read that somewhere.
We have borrowed your brains.
We're one nation, me, us, you, Zambia, all 16 nations. I don't have a problem with that.
Yes, so we have all of these elements in place to foster and drive industrialization. Again, it's about ensuring that the prosperity really reaches the grassroots level, and that is what we're hoping
I mean, I did get, getting back to Zimbabwe and Namibia in terms of bilateral, I did get a comment from a critic saying that you have this joint Zimbabwe-Namibia Permanent Commission on Cooperation, which is a great mouthful. But there's some projects that were supposed to be implemented under them, but nothing seems to have moved. Tell me, can you give me an update on that? What's happening under that joint Zimbabwe-Namibia joint commission?
Our JPCC has been elevated to the binational commission level.
Oh, so it's very important now.
No, it's very important. because it will be chaired by our respective states, heads of states. So that means that the Commission, which has still not happened, I've mentioned that we have signed the agreement, it was part of the agreements that we signed, but the Commission has not taken place. So one of the efforts that we're working on is to have the inaugural session of the Binational Commission. I think that will provide the context and political will for the implementation of most of these
because with the presidents behind it.
The presidents are behind it,
works,
so you have to work.
Yeah, well, it works, It shows that you have the support.
Yeah, and I think we need to keep in mind that the world has changed since 2019, 2021. We had an apocalypse of COVID-19,
which I must say, Sadc though did come to the party.
Response.
They really did. I mean, if you look at the cases, incidence of COVID, illness in this part of the world, it was very low compared to everywhere else on the planet.
Exactly, and so we are working behind closed doors on implementing these agreements. We recently signed a cooperation agreement between our prisons, and so there's action. However slow, there is action in the right direction.
Things
and
are
we're looking
moving
forward to it.
Now, there's definitely no doubt about it that the leaders are going to talk about the African Continental Free Trade Area. I mean, it has to be part, because of course the agenda of the theme of this summit is trade and industrialization, so it makes a lot of sense. Are you ready for Africa as Namibia? Because I get the feeling, I think, with my surveys and what we do as ZTM Prime, we're not ready, or we're scared a bit about it. And also, are you ready for Africa? But more importantly, how do you think African Continental Free Trade Area should work? Because a lot of business seem to have this impression that we should be competing. In other words, my company here that makes bread should be competing with a Namibian company that makes bread into a new market in Africa. Whereas I'm thinking, why? Why can't we either work together, or I make the packaging for you, you make the bread for me because it's cheaper to market. We have the stocks which are cheaper rather than you getting the wheat. We can just do it here. Regional cooperation in Africa to then benefit our countries. What is Namibia's view? Are you kind of like our companies first in African Continental, or is it us with other African countries together?
What needs to happen is for each country to identify their strengths, and for us to borrow on those strengths. Namibia is doing well in terms of renewable energy, for example, and livestock production. And then we look at Zimbabwe, who is a master in terms of fertilizer and growing what is on the land, and we exchange those. So it is never about competition, it's about collaboration, drawing on each other's strengths and expertise, meeting each other halfway, and coming up with a strategy which is inclusive in that it takes note of each country's contribution or their able contribution to the theme of industrialization.
Look, I've noticed a lot of detractors, and I've noticed a lot's been happening in the last couple of weeks, trying to, what I could only call, drive a wedge between other countries, and even some of the reasons why don't make a lot of sense to me. And I think it's important, I mean, your view, I mean, from what I see, Sadc seems stronger than ever, and more together than ever. What is your view about the relationship between Sadc nations? Because look, countries always disagree. No one ever agrees. But at the end of the day, you're on the same page.
That is why it's called a relationship.
Exactly. Yes, you're right.
I think our relationship as member states is evergreen, and that is because we are sort of supported by a common purpose and a common goal, which is to foster peace and prosperity within our region. Differences come and go, but when you have a greater vision that is informing your action, you tend to move together. And you know the African proverb, there's no shortcuts to the top of the palm tree, and you sort of need help from each other to reach that top of the palm tree. And so we will continue to work together and foster a strength of relations.
Now, of course, I'm hoping, this is a question for you, will they be Namibian companies coming here to look at whether being part of the investment day, or rather part of the industrial week?
Yes, we have received an invitation to be part of the investment forum. We are still waiting for HQ to respond in terms of the dates where they will be available, and
But companies hopefully will come.
No. I mean, it can go both ways. I think we'll be participating in the investment forum as well as the Industrial Week.
Okay.
We will not have companies coming per se, but the Ministry of Industrialization and Trade, as well as the Namibian Investment Promotion and Development Board, will bring Namibian products to Zimbabwe for showcasing.
Zemha, finally, I know I've taken a lot of your time, and thank you so much for talking to us. Where is the relationship, in your view, between Namibia and Zimbabwe going?
From strength to strength. From strength to strength, Andy. Of course, there are several areas that we need to work on, but we are eager to engage each other on various initiatives, from economic cooperation to social and cultural cooperation, even military cooperation.
Yeah. Security is important.
Security is important.
So important. We need to be secure from from foreign and domestic, as someone would say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we will continue. I think one of the last things that I would want to say is to urge and encourage all the Namibians residing across the 10 provinces in Zimbabwe to really take time and come visit the embassy and register as voters for the upcoming election.
Oh yes, I saw when we drove in voter registration.
Right.
When is the election?
The election will be held on the 27th of November, but the diaspora vote will be cast on the 13th of November, and the general registration of voters will be ending on the 1st of August.
So you have your right to vote. Vote. Yeah, that's always what we say in Zimbabwe, correct? Zemha Gawachas, thank you so much for talking to ZTM Prime. Really appreciate that. Well, that was Zemha Gawachas, the Namibian Chargé d'Affaires based here at the Namibian Embassy in Harare. You've been listening to our conversations. We're going to continue our series talking to Sadc ambassadors as we build up here at ZTM Prime for the 44th Heads of Sadc meeting to be held here in Harare. I'm Andy Hodges. This has been our conversations. Goodbye, and please, you all be safe.